Hello, Father Rich. Again, coming to you here. I've kind of started trying to use some visuals. Emily Dickinson and her poems is our next masterpiece, number 40, the complete poems that go back to about 1890, but over a lifetime. She actually, after she died, she wasn't well known during her life. And they kind of start the chapter out explaining how she went from, as a girl, being kind of this extroverted, outgoing young woman who enjoyed traveling with her congressman father to the cities in New England where she was from, and then even down into Philadelphia, New York. But that by the time she was a young adult, she had basically secluded herself to her second floor bedroom, and kind of wondering what led to this shift in her approach. Some suggest that it was because some love interest, had scorned her, or disappointment, it didn't work. But others just suggest it could have been some kind of a psychological condition. Some propose agoraphobia. But others just say maybe that's where she just discovered she was the most happy and at peace, and where she wrote poems, which was her passion. Whatever it was, that was where she spent most of her life until she was died at the age of 55 of what they think is probably some kind of a heart condition. Once they saw the later doctors looked at her symptoms, but during this time she incredibly wrote letters and poems, and she'd end up having over 1,700 letters and poems that she created over the years in her writing. And again, she did send, I think, something like 10 poems to one of the local publications, and some of them were actually released. But it wasn't until she died and her sister got a hold of what she had that they really released the fullness of what she had. And I'm trying to find who that was, but nonetheless. So they say that these letters and poems reveal the woman she had become, a careful observer of the world and of her own self, someone cynical about easy answers to life's hard questions, a wrestler with God, and a poet who found her own entirely unique way of communicating about life and death, time and eternity, faith and doubt, the simple beauty she saw in nature, and the exquisite suffering she felt within her innermost self. So they mentioned she was born in 1830 in Amherst, Massachusetts. Kind of an uneventful outward life. She was educated at Amherst Academy and Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. But they say that she found herself resistant to the spiritual revivalism that was common in this time, the religious fervor that was kind of sweeping. In her letters, she suggests that she wasn't drawn into like these dramatic conversions that others around her were experiencing. She felt interest in it, but she also felt concern that it could cause a feeling of being swept up into kind of an emotional decisions and religious life. So she was skeptical of that. So she ends up kind of falling in between. She ends up kind of, even though they were staunch Calvinists in the seminary and her exposure in New England, she resisted that and never kind of fully embraced that. But she definitely, her spiritual side continued to be very evident in her poems that she was writing. So again, her sister found 60 little books, I guess, when she died at the age of 55. They were sewn together by Emily herself. They were tied together and tucked away in a box. And they really contained her life's works. So this Dickinson, who had been the editor that had published like 10 of her poems while she was living, ended up publishing her poems posthumously after she died. But what they did was they tidied up the grammar. She had a unique style that she would have random punctuation, kind of make up words and have grammatical errors intentionally. So they cleaned it up and they put out an edition of those, and that was the one that was well known until 1955. Finally, they put together an edition of her poetry that went back to the original way that she wrote it, with all the punctuation that she had and the words that she used and the spellings. And so that's kind of finally considered the real Emily Dickinson poetry in 1955. And they say you really need to read them that way to really appreciate her completely. So she certainly was concerned about questions about God and eternity. This was very evident in her poetry, and in kind of how she approached things. I love this quote. Reading her poetry is like eavesdropping on her whispered conversations and angry arguments with God. She was very honest in them, and very honest about where she was at. I am one of the lingering bad ones, and so do I slink away and pause and ponder and ponder and pause and do work without knowing why, not surely for this brief world, and not more so and more sure it is not for heaven. And I asked, what does this message of Christ means? So definitely a lot of questioning, a lot of doubting, but then sometimes doubting the doubt. She was definitely kind of in between and always struggling. She's often asking, what is one to make of life in view of the imminence of death? They say her second floor bedroom window overlooked a cemetery. So that was constantly confronting her, this idea of death and this reality of death and her struggles to kind of figure that out. So she kind of says she wasn't just interested in receiving the cookie cutter answers that, so to speak, from doctrine and dogma that she saw in religion. So she kind of felt uncomfortable with people that seemed to think they had all the answers and had everything figured out. And so she kind of says her ideal worship was described in these lines. It was a short procession. The bobolink was there, and aged bee addressed us, and then we knelt in prayer. So kind of the seeing God in nature, this idea of just seeing God in the world around us, these kind of things. So they say that most people didn't take note of her while she was living. It really wasn't until she died that she became well loved and became to be appreciated by the people that got exposed to her poetry, to the point that she's one of the best well-known poets in American history to this point. So that's the experience of the poems of Emily Dickinson. Our next one will be number 41, The Life of Our Lord Jesus Christ, a series of paintings by James Tissot, another American artist. So we'll get to hear more about that. So thanks for joining me. Have a great day and God bless.